This is Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, which is the second film in the series, once again directed by Gore Verbinski, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, and brings back most of the cast from the first movie. Now, this is always the point in the review where I talk about the plot and what the movie's about. However, one of the elements that the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels are infamous for is for having overly complicated plots with a concept that is very simple. But I'm going to try the best of my ability to explain the plot for this movie. So Jack Sparrow now has control over the Black Pearl again, after the events of the first movie. But it turns out the original reason he even had the Black Pearl to begin with is that he made a deal with the devil of the ocean, Davy Jones, who's played by Bill Nighy. He made a deal with Jones to raise the pearl from the depths of the ocean and to be captain for 13 years. Technically, he was only captain for like 2 years before Barbossa led the mutiny, but that doesn't matter to Davy Jones. So Jack Sparrow is on an adventure to try and clear his name and settle his debt with Jones. Simple, right? Well, here's some of the stuff that comes in that we didn't need in the movie. Both Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann are arrested by the East India Trading Company and its leader, Cutler Beckett, for helping Jack Sparrow escape at the end of the first movie. So Cutler Beckett sends Will Turner to find Jack Sparrow and retrieve Jack Sparrow's compass to bring back to Beckett in exchange for a pardon for Will Turner's release. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Swann escapes prison, goes on a journey to try and find Will Turner and basically get reunited. And then Will Turner finds his long-lost father, Bootstrap Bill, who's a member of Davy Jones's crew aboard the Flying Dutchman, and then Commodore James Norrington is brought back into the mix. Does it sound like I'm rambling? I'll just stop right now, because I'm just going to go a little too far. I'll be describing the plot forever. But when this movie was coming out, it was a big deal, because everyone loved the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, because mainly it was a big surprise. A movie that we thought was going to suck balls actually ended up kicking a lot of ass. So everyone was excited about the second movie, and when it was coming out over at Disneyland and a bunch of the other Disney parks, they modified the Pirates of the Caribbean rides to include characters from the movie. Like they included a Hector Barbossa animatronic, they included a hologram of Davy Jones, and they included several Jack Sparrow animatronics scattered throughout the ride.
Pirates like for me. A toast to pirates and its many shining rewards.
Some people have conflicting opinions on those elements, but for me personally, they're just really small elements, and the ride is still the same as it was. So I'm not too harsh on it. So with all that build-up and all that little extra promotion at the parks, Dead Man's Chest ought to be awesome, right? Well, you think. I mean, okay, let me just say this right off the bat. I don't think this movie's bad. It's flawed as hell, no question about it. But I think out of all the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, this is the best one that's made. I haven't seen On Stranger Tides since it came out in theaters, so that statement might change when I review On Stranger Tides. But with Dead Man's Chest, it has a lot of good things in it, but it's also bogged down by a lot of complications. As I said, the plot is a little too overcomplicated, and there are a few elements that kind of lend to this problem. One is that they tried to make this movie feel huge and grand in scope on a level of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, when in actuality, it should have just been like Indiana Jones. It should have been very simple, straightforward, and to the point. Because there are a lot of things that get introduced in this movie that ultimately lead nowhere, and you ask, what was the point of that? However, in defense of the movie, or at least at the time it came out, both this and the third movie, At World's End, were filmed back-to-back, so we all assumed, okay, so whatever they introduced in this movie that they didn't close up on, surely that'll get answered in the third movie. Whether or not it did, you'll have to wait and find out when I review At World's End next week. But the second element is that both Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann had no reason to be roped back into the series. Both Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley do a good job with what they're given, but their characters' stories ended in the first movie. It was pretty much a bookend for these two, and to just have them get roped back into the series is kind of unnecessary. You could make the argument that it's okay to bring Will Turner back because we fully get introduced to his father, Bootstrap Bill, who here is played by Stellan Skarsgård, which I can get on board, except in the first movie, they say several times that both Will and his father look identical. And when you watch this movie, you're like, no, Orlando Bloom and Stellan Skarsgård look nothing alike. So what was the point of all that dialogue in the first movie saying how the two of them looked identical? No. So again, the actors aren't bad, but the characters just feel useless and unnecessary. Commodore James Norrington is also back from the first movie, who was originally engaged to Mary Elizabeth and ended up being the guy who sort of chased Jack Sparrow throughout the first movie. In the way the movie is now with the final product that we have, he again has no reason to be in this movie. But if they slightly reworked the script to make it a more self-contained movie, he might have worked. He could have been following Jack Sparrow after the events of the first movie, but kind of gets in the way with Davy Jones and is killed in the process. So that would have been a little more interesting. But I'm falling into that scenario of, if I made this movie, here's what I would have done. So maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have worked, but in my opinion, with what we have right here, James Norrington had no purpose to be in it. The movie is also too long. This movie is just longer by only a few minutes compared to the first one. But the first one was better at having a tighter story and a little more clever editing to make the pacing feel a lot better, and you were never bored in that movie. In this one, there are several moments where you could say, yeah, I'm kind of bored here. I wish I could just move along. Like, all the scenes involving the East India Trading Company are dull, and that subplot just, you don't care. You just want to go and see Jack Sparrow, be Jack Sparrow, and go on his quest to try and clear his name from Davy Jones. Which now would be a great opportunity to jump into what I did like about this movie. Because personally, I think the positives outweighed the negatives in this movie. Johnny Depp still does a fantastic job as Captain Jack Sparrow. His performance has kind of lost the magic that was in the first movie, mainly because it is the second movie. We already know this character, so we do know how he functions. The level of unpredictability is lost, but he still gives it his all, and even with all the other sequels, Johnny Depp still continues to do an amazing job as the captain. The action scenes are a lot of fun, and a lot of them are actually pretty creative. There are two scenes in particular that are really creative in the way they're filmed and presented. One of them involves these giant cage balls that the crew of the Black Pearl have to run across, and they're rolling around. It's a lot of fun, and it makes me laugh. And there's another scene involving a sword fight on top of and inside a watermill wheel, and the way the camera's attached to the watermill wheel, it's pretty creative, and there's a lot of great stunt work going on. Some of it's CG, some of it's practical, but it all blends in perfectly to make it truly a fun scene. There are points in this movie where they break the laws of physics. I mean, the first movie, it had elements that made you go, yeah, that technically can't happen, but you're selling it in a way where I could believe it. In this one, there are several moments where you're like, I'm sorry, if your character was ever caught in that situation involving gravity or just the circumstances of this particular action scene, you'd be dead. There's no walking away from that, and no amount of enjoyability can make me put aside the fact that that physically couldn't happen. It's still fun, but it will definitely make you question the laws of physics. The music is also fantastic. This time Hans Zimmer is in full control, and he would be in full control for the rest of the series, except for the upcoming Dead Men Tell No Tales. And this was actually my first introduction to Hans Zimmer, once I actually started listening to music scores by themselves. And it's a great introduction. I may have said in the past, in a couple of other videos, that Hans Zimmer kind of gets lazy with the score, like with Chappie and Batman vs. Superman. But for every Chappie and Batman vs. Superman he does, he'll always come up with something like The Lion King, the Dark Knight series, the Pirates of the Caribbean series. as much as I hate to admit it, Man of Steel, and anytime he's working with Christopher Nolan, it really does show that Hans Zimmer is one of the best composers working today. John Williams will always be my favorite, but Hans Zimmer is definitely in that rank. One of the biggest strengths of this movie is in the design department. This movie got nominated for Best Production Design when it came out, and a lot of that does have to do with everything involving the Flying Dutchman and Davy Jones's crew. The Flying Dutchman is basically this living ship full of barnacles and a bunch of seaweed and moss. It's really creative, and each crew member of the Flying Dutchman is really creative in terms of their design. Each character is very unique, and you remember them for just the way they look. Although it will make you question why Stellan Skarsgård is the only member of the Flying Dutchman crew who's not CGI. That I have no follow-up on that. That's just a weird thing that even when I loved this movie when it came out, I always thought, why is he real and everyone else is CGI? But whatever. Each character has a very unique design, including Davy Jones himself, who, as I mentioned before, is played by Bill Nighy via motion capture, and his design is super creative. He's got tentacles for a beard, he's got a crab leg for a peg leg, one hand is just a regular hand where his index finger is an octopus or squid tentacle, the other hand is a lobster claw. It's just a really great design. And in terms of the character himself, I think he's a villain that's almost as good as Hector Barbosa was in Curse of the Black Pearl. And Bill Nighy's motion capture performance is incredible. There are a few points in the movie where they do try to make Davy Jones more of a tragic character. I don't think it works a lot of the time, mainly because in this movie alone, that kind of leads to nothing. But Bill Nighy still does a fantastic job on selling you on the role. And this is a motion capture performance on the level of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings films. One of those things where even if the effect is super good, it's still the actor's doing. Acting is still acting, even if you're playing a CG character. So I definitely love Davy Jones in this movie, both as a character and in terms of his design. But the best part of this movie, the one thing for all this film's shortcomings that I can point to and say, this is excellent, is every scene involving the Kraken. And I know it's kind of cliche of me to really say that the best part of the movie has to deal with some sort of sea monster, but I feel like it's true. Basically, Davy Jones has control of the Kraken to take out ships at his command. And whenever the Kraken is on screen, everything is jumped up to 11 and done as best as possible. The acting, the music, the directing, the way it's shot, the visual effects, it's all top notch. And I love how this movie treats the Kraken the way that Jaws treated the shark. You only get one glimpse of the Kraken where you see its whole body, but it's underwater and it's kind of murky. The rest of the movie, all you see are its tentacles swinging around, tearing up the ships, grabbing people, dragging them under. It's all incredibly well done. And the one thing that really makes me smile when I think about this movie and the Kraken is that the visual effects team was told to use the giant octopus scene from King Kong vs. Godzilla as a frame of reference. And I apologize for nothing. If I'm reviewing a movie and there is a bit of Godzilla trivia out there, I'm going to talk about it. You can't stop me, so ha! I honestly had no follow-up on that, but it makes total sense for them to use that scene as a frame of reference because King Kong vs. Godzilla used a real octopus for most of that sequence. So what better frame of reference to use than a real living organic octopus? And I love it. Every scene with the Kraken, as I said, is an A+ scene. So overall, Dead Man's Chest is a good sequel. It's just not as good as the original at all. The original benefited from having a surprise and just climbing this uphill battle when we all thought it was gonna suck. This one, it's fun, but it is littered with problems. It is a little overly complicated. Some characters don't need to be in this movie. And also, this movie just kind of stops. It doesn't really have a big conclusion. And it just kind of peters out at the end. It does try to have that Empire Strikes Back feeling where the bad guys in the end win. But there's no big jaw-dropping shock of a twist that Empire Strikes Back had to make you truly invested in seeing the next film. As I said, this one kind of ends on a whimper. So my rating would be good, but not great. It is definitely enjoyable, and I still think that the positives outweigh the negatives. But it is heavily flawed. So if you just go into this knowing that it's not going to be as good as the first movie, then I think you'll enjoy it. And that's my review for Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. Next week, we're going to be talking about its sequel, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which I'm looking forward to it in more ways than one. So until next week, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.